Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi, we're happy to have you all with us on this beautiful Wednesday morning.
Morning, everybody.
All right, now that we have more than 20 of us, we can go ahead and just jump right in because we have a lot to go over today. So good morning and thank you again for joining us today. My name is Maya Sarno. I'm the Associate Director for Student Support at Rutgers Global International Student and Scholar Services, also known as ISSS. With me today, I have two of our Senior International Student Advisors, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hi, Stephanie Ott, Senior International Student Advisor.
Good morning, everyone. Carissa McCarthy, Senior International Student Advisor.
Great, thank you. And we will have more of our staff join us later in the morning, and we'll get to meet all the other advisors with our office. So we're really grateful that you've taken the time today to join us and discuss how we all work together to support our international students here at Rutgers. We view this workshop as an opportunity to connect with our campus partners. We look forward to it every fall and every spring. And we welcome faculty and administrators from across the university. And it's a time for us to learn from each other about each of our roles in serving our international students. Our international students are a unique population that each of us help to support. And we offer this workshop every semester as a way to underscore our collective commitment to student retention and positive outcomes. So for the administrators and student services staff that are joining us today, we're aware that working with international students involves different roles, and there's many cases in which you play a part. Throughout the morning, we will clarify some of the regulations and the requests that you receive, and we'll go into greater detail about how these requests, the electronic requests that you receive, and how you play a key role in the different parts of our students' journey at Rutgers. So before we get started, I want to go over just a few housekeeping notes. First of all, we have a mixed group of here today. We have deans, program directors, administrators, and student support staff. After the first half of today's workshop, we'll go over, in the first half of the workshop, we'll be going over some general points about students' needs and our office, the structure of our office, how we serve students. Then we'll have a short break. After the break, we'll come back, and in the second half of the workshop, will consist mostly of breakout rooms with our advising team. So you'll have our whole advising team with us, and we'll do a little bit of a deep dive into discussing case studies, talk about some specific student issues, give you all a chance to share your own best practices of working with international students, and we'll open the floor for lots of opportunity for any lingering questions that you might have for us. If you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to use the chat box or write them down, and we'll be sure to address them later in the workshop. We want to make sure that you leave without having any questions that were not answered this morning. After the presentation, we'll send out electronic evaluations, and we thank you in advance very much for taking the time not only to stay with us this morning, but also to offer your honest feedback afterwards. We very much value your input, as every semester when we do this, your feedback really helps us construct how we want to do the workshop in the future and consider other ways that we can engage with our campus partners. Also, this presentation today is being recorded, so it will be made available to you afterwards if you have any colleagues who might want to view it. And we're also going to provide a PDF version of the slides afterwards. All right, so just to go over a little bit about what to expect from this morning, we're going to first discuss the unique needs of our international students. We'll go over some introductory concepts and terminology related to them and their status as international students on F1 or J1 status. We're going to provide some background and context in terms of regulatory compliance and talk about how these things can affect you in your particular work with supporting international students. We're also going to go over reporting requirements, maintaining legal status for students and what that means, and how we can work together to make sure that our students are following the regulations and following the law as it pertains to their legal status. Along with some updates from our office, we will also discuss departmental roles and expectations in assisting our international student population. And we'll go over some best practices, not just from our office, but talk about your best practices and what's worked for you in collaboratively supporting our students. So before we go into detail about our particular office, ISSS, I want to briefly let you know about the other units within Rutgers Global, because you might hear Rutgers Global and know at least it's us, but maybe not know about the rest of the parts of our department. So the ISSS is our office, and we work directly with international students and scholars. Then we have Study Abroad, which sends students to study outside the US. The China office oversees international academic success, which helps support the RU Fit program, which you may have heard of, especially if you work for undergraduate students. And the China office also supports the Rutgers Overseas Semester Experience, which is also known as the ROSE program. The ROSE program was developed in response to the COVID pandemic, and it offers Chinese students the opportunity to experience their first or second semester of Rutgers at a partner university campus in China. There are 3 locations with the Chinese partner universities: Beijing, Guangzhou, and Shanghai. The first semester for this program was in fall 2020, and we are extending it into spring 2022. The programs unit also helps support university-wide cultural and academic programs for students, faculty, and staff. And then we have our International Partnership Office. The Partnership Office develops agreements and builds relationships with universities worldwide and coordinates visits from international delegations. Specifically, we have staff in the Partnerships Office that are working on initiatives in China and Latin America. So if you're interested in learning more about any of these units, you can learn more at global.rutgers.edu. Here's a snapshot of our current organizational structure. As you may or may not know, we've experienced a few changes lately, most notably due to the recent retirement of our former executive director, Urmi Otiv, but we are still well poised to support our international student and scholar population with the existing staff. So ISSS is roughly divided into student services and faculty and scholar services. So Mohini Mukherjee leads our team of student services staff members. And our Director of Faculty and Scholar Services, Asaf Dande, has a group of Scholar Services staff. In addition, we also have some central administration staff taking care of our front office, compliance, and health insurance. So historically, we merged with RBHS and their international office in 2015. So we have 2 staff in our RBHS Newark office. One of them is Stephanie Ott, who introduced herself earlier today. Our office has grown a lot in the past few years. And so our office at 180 College Ave, we kind of outgrew that office. And so those of you who work with our international faculty and scholars will know that our scholars team moved to 30 College Ave. The student services team remains at 180 College Ave. I'd also like to point out that in addition to our degree-seeking student advisors on our student services team, we also have 2 specialty advisor positions. So Carissa, who you met earlier, takes care of our non-degree short-term students and student interns. So she's the one who's able to help you if you're looking to bring a student on campus who's not looking to pursue a degree at Rutgers. And then we also have Greg Costalis, who's our sponsored student advisor. Greg works with very specialized groups of students, mostly not on Rutgers sponsorships. For example, students who are sponsored by Fulbright or other third-party agencies. And Greg is located at 30 College Ave. So back to our office and what we do. I'd like to go into a bit about what exactly we do to serve and support international students. The core of our office is to provide immigration advice to our F1 and J1 international students. We assist students in maintaining their legal status, and we'll go over what that means later and everything that maintaining status entails. And we help students comply with and follow the federal regulations to keep the institution approved for hosting international students. So it's not just to keep the students within compliance, but also to keep the university in compliance as well. In terms of student advising, we host virtual appointments daily, except for Wednesdays when our office is closed, and in-person advising by appointment only. We also advise through our virtual off-campus employment chat sessions. We have remote quick question advising, or we call QQA, and our front office staff is able to answer questions over the phone. Finally, all of our workshops have been moved online. Obviously, this happened, as a result of the pandemic. We moved all the workshops online, but our students can now review the workshops through Canvas on their own pace and refer back to them as well. So as an international services office, we really view and pride ourselves as being a holistic office. In addition to advising, we provide programming for international students and scholars. And one of our big programs is the mandatory student orientation program. So the orientation program was moved to a virtual setting in 2020, 2021. And now since then, we've transitioned to a hybrid approach as we started coming back to campus. So we did a hybrid approach in fall 2021, and we're going to do a hybrid approach also for spring 2022. The hybrid orientation we felt was very successful. We received excellent feedback from our students. And we also work closely with the Rutgers Global Programs Office. The Programs Office helps both with the orientation, but also with virtual and in-person programming throughout the year. So talking about our advisors a little bit, our advisors serve as liaisons for departments, academic departments. They're the main points of contact for each academic department. So we have a liaison list, and I think that list can go in the chat. It's available online. You can take a look to see who the liaison for your department is in case you're not sure. And that's someone that you can reach out to when you have general questions about working with your international students. Finally, we talk about communication. So our office is really committed to providing clear communication to both staff and our campus constituents. We know that there's a lot that goes into advising international students, a lot with regulations, a lot with policies, and things change. And so communication is really key to make clear about different changes, different updates, and what's going on with international students. International students have many deadlines and rules, and we try to keep them on their radars. And so we let students know about these deadlines through automated emails. We have updates to our website. We have monthly notices that we send out to students and more. So we do a lot to try to keep you, our campus partners, informed of major policy updates that affect international students. We all know that Rutgers is a big place, and so we do our best to help students navigate it and also identify all the resources on campus that they need to succeed. So let's talk about partnerships a little bit. We're just one of the many offices that work with international students at Rutgers. Like I said, Rutgers is a big place, and obviously our work cannot be completed without collaborating with all of you, our campus partners. So while we provide immigration advising and we have programs for international students, we can't be all things to all students, right? It takes a village. So we absolutely need the cashier's office, for example, to handle student accounting. We need academic departments to advise on course requirements. We refer students to the Dean of Students office or absolutely CAPS when needed, and many, many more. Because of this, we're making concerted efforts to build relationships and work together with other academic and non-academic units to improve the international student experience. So it's part of why we get together today is to try to continue to nurture these relationships with our campus partners. So thank you again for being part of that whole process. So here's a snapshot of our international student statistics as they are right now for the current semester, fall 2021. So you can take a look. We have our current numbers on the left side, and on the right side, we have our numbers from the past several years. As you can see, we had a steady increase over the last several years, and then there's a decline around the time of the pandemic in 2020, 2021. So this isn't a surprise, and it's in keeping with national trends. Specifically, undergraduate student enrollment went down about 30% since 2019. But again, this is very consistent with trends that we've seen at other universities across the nation. So it's to be expected. Same with graduate enrollment and graduate programs. There's been a little bit of a dip in graduate enrollment, and some programs have been a little bit slow to grow. But again, we feel like that's probably due to the pandemic and past difficulties of the last year and a half plus. But we do expect that the ship will right itself. And we know that these are turbulent times, but we're confident as an institution that Rutgers has really continued to ensure our international student population that they're welcome here. There's been clear communication from President Holloway down to our office to really try to ensure to students that they are welcome and that we'll support them when they do get here. So we try to give them the most positive experience possible. And a big part of this is just student support. Student support is obviously key to retaining students, both the students that are here, but also it helps with our future enrollment. So if you're interested in following the data about our international student enrollment, you'll be interested to know that we will soon have a dashboard that's going to be featured on our website that will allow us to share our stats and numbers in a more public format. So more to come on that. So here's a brief overview of a typical international student journey. Like all students, they first apply to Rutgers, and then once they're here and admitted, they're issued either an I-20 or a DS 2019 document from admissions. They take this document along with some other documents and materials to a US embassy or consulate for a visa application. Then, once they arrive to the US, students have to maintain their legal status. Like I said, we'll talk shortly about what all is involved in maintaining their legal status. Many times during the journey, they wish to participate in on-campus or off-campus employment. And then at the end of their degree, they're given some options, which include applying for OPT, transferring to a different program or school, or maybe returning home. So we'll talk more about this later. But for now, I'm going to pass the mic off to Carissa. And Carissa will start by explaining a bit more about who our international students are.
Thanks, Maya. I just want to clarify one little point with the Fulbright students. So Greg is pretty instrumental in working with the Fulbright students prior to their arrival. But now there's been a change where I'm advising the Fulbright students and the sponsored students when they are after they're admitted and after they're here. So that was kind of a new change. But yeah, so let's talk about who are international students and what that term means, and what the different visa types consist of international students. So the term international students might seem straightforward, which is our foreign nationals studying in the United States. And while that's true, our office advises international students, mainly F1 and J1, on F1 and J1 status. Some students might identify themselves as international students, but they might actually be US citizens or permanent residents, or even in some less common statuses like a spouse of a student or a child of someone working on a working visa, as an example. So the majority of our students self-identified as international students are in F1 and J1 status. And the majority of our students are in F1 status. So the purpose and intention of an individual who's entering in the US in F1 status is to study full-time. And we've talked about this I-20 form, which is also known as the Certificate of Eligibility, and it's generated for our international students, as Maya had mentioned, after they're admitted. So the initial I-20s are generally issued by our admissions office, and typically if there's any changes that need to be made to that document after they're admitted, it would be done by our office. So one of the benefits of an F1 status, students studying on F1 status, is that students have the ability to work on campus at Rutgers. And in very specific situations and circumstances, they can work off campus through what's called CPT, which is curricular practical training, or OPT, known as optional practical training. And we'll discuss employment a bit later. But there's also J1 status as a student status, and individuals who enter on a J1 status are known as exchange visitors. And that differs, the J1 status differs from F1 because the J1 status has many different categories within the exchange visitor category of the visa. And for those of you who work with the faculty and scholars at Rutgers, you probably know this because there's a J1 category for faculty and scholars, along with the student J1 category. So the J1 students have the Certificate of Eligibility known as the DS 2019, and our J1 students are subject to slightly different rules that are unlike our F1 students, and specifically that comes to play when they're working on campus or off campus. And there's also short-term non-degree students that were mentioned that I work closely with, and they are F and J. So there's lots of different types of students. And you may be wondering what the main difference between the F1 and J1 students are. And mainly that's determined by the source of funding. So F1 students are generally funded by themselves through personal or family funds. In some cases also Rutgers as like an assistantship, but J1 students are different, and they're mostly funded through third-party funds like Fulbright or sponsorship or their government. So that's one of the main differences between F and J. Okay, we can go to the next slide.
Can I ask a quick question, Carissa?
Sure.
Could you go back to this? This is we may get to this later, but this is a big first question for me. So we have always, worked on the notion that students, international students with F1 or J1 status, F1 status have to provide proof of funding for at least a full-time year in the program, right? I mean, that's a standard, but you just said a minute ago, or an assistantship. If a doctoral level student is going to be offered full funding, like let's say a student from China applies and we say, yes, we want you, we're going to fund you, we're going to bring you in and you'll be fully funded. Do they still need to provide the funding proof from their personal status if we are going to fund them as a PhD student?
As an F1 student,
Right.
When they go for the visa interview, it's a good question. I mean, really, it's confusing. What I would say the general consensus is that the more funding they have, the stronger their application is. So,
Right.
I mean, technically, the visa officer may not ask for additional funding, but they could. I mean, funding is one of the #1 reasons why students get denied visas.
Right.
So it's always good. So we probably have advised them to bring extra. Usually the admissions office may not say that, but it's always good for them to have extra. So
Yeah.
technically,
All right, I'll go with you this further on offline, because we get some interesting email requests from students saying, I don't have any money, but if you give me an assistantship, I could come to your school. And I don't think they get as far as us if they can't provide the funding up front. So we'll talk about
no, that's yeah, let's talk for sure.
Okay, great. Didn't mean to hijack, but that's something
No,
that's been
it's okay.
for a long time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so CVIS, let's talk about a little bit about CVIS. So the I-20 and DS-219 are generated through the CVIS database, which we help to manage, and CVIS stands for Student and Exchange Visitor Information System, and that's the database owned by the U.S. government that's maintained through Rutgers, through our school, and specifically our office is tasked for that. So because we have so many students and records to maintain, we also have another in-house database called Synapsys, which helps us keep track of the records, and information from Rutgers data warehouse is passed on through Synapsys and then passed on through to CVIS for reporting purposes. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of information to report about the students. So we always want to make sure it's accurate and up to date for each of our students in CVIS so that it's current. And we must report all this information to the government through CVIS, like their program information, their address, their phone number, their email, any updates that happen through their My Rutgers or personal information, employment, dependent information, and any their reduced credit loads, for example, if they're taking less than full time. So we can move on to looking at the I-20 and DS-219 form. So as we mentioned, this document is given to the students when they're admitted to Rutgers after they show proof of their funding. So this document has a lot of their information, their personal information, their program information, their level of study, specific information, what they're looking to pursue. So, and there's also start and end dates to these documents, and they're towards the middle of the slide there. So these documents should not expire while they're in their program and they're at Rutgers. And it's important to note that they're generated in CVIS, and it's their responsibility to make sure that they're keeping track of their documents. So let's talk about the visa versus status. So if everyone's heard me say F1 and J1 status, as you may know, there's the visa, which is the entry stamp in their passport. And that allows them to enter the US legally. So in terms of the visa and the status, they're all related. They go hand in hand, but they're not the same thing. So it's true that a student in F1 status would need to enter the US on a on an F1 visa. But that is just the foil in their passport that's granted by the embassy or the consulate overseas. So that allows them to enter the US. The visa reflects their non-immigrant status that they've entered in the US. But the visa is like a key to get into the US. It holds, if the US is a house, the visa is the key to get in. But the visa holder can only enter the US if the visa is valid and it's not expired. So once they enter the US with that key, their status then begins, and they have to maintain their status to make sure that they're legally in the US. And they have to do that by making sure their documents, their status documents, are not expired. So we can go on and move to the visa. So our friend Harry is at Rutgers, and you can see that he has a F1 visa. And inside this yellow box, you can see the expiration date. The main point to remember is that, again, while he's entered the US, his visa is still valid, but if it expires when he's in the US, it's not a problem, because as long as he maintains his legal status, his I-20 is valid and not expired, he's maintaining his status, and he's in his program, it's not a problem. So once the visa is expired, he can only renew his visa, his key to enter the US, outside the US, at a US embassy or consulate. So it's important to note that, once you get the visa, it's actually not guaranteed for you to come in, because you're still required to meet with the Customs and Border Patrol and then be permissible to be entered in the US. So there's always never a guarantee unless you're actually here, and then your status begins. Okay. So we can go to I-94. So in relation to the visa stamp and status, once you've entered the US as a student, the student gets an I-94, and that is your entry and departure record issued by the Customs and Border Protection Officer. So it states how long the visa, it states how long the visa holder may stay in the US, and it proves that they've entered the US legally. So as an example, an F1 student has an I-94 record. You can see it says F1 status under the class of admission, and they're admitted until D/S. That may seem kind of unusual because it's not an actual date, but it means duration of status. So F1 and J1 students are the only visa type in which they're noted on their I-94 that they're expected to, they can maintain their status for the duration of their status, and there's no actual expiration date on the I-94. As long as they're maintaining their status, they're able to stay here. There is some discussion about how the Department of Homeland Security would like to eliminate the D/S rule and actually make an actual expiration date. But that right now has been withdrawn from the Biden administration, and there's no plans of moving forward. But again, things keep changing. We never know exactly where it's going to happen, where things are going to land. But there's always changes that are coming up, and we would hope that would not come into play, because it could negatively affect our international students in many ways. So we can discuss that more if we need to in a breakout room. So moving forward to government agencies. So speaking of the government, I'd like to just briefly go over the variety of government offices that we're responsible for within the programs and that international students then participate and work with. So we work closely with these units, and our office is kind of unique where we do work parallel with these organizations. And we work closely with them because a lot of these organizations then publish the regulatory information that we have to comply with and then communicate that with our students. So as you can imagine, interpreting the government regulations have been fun, especially in the past couple of years. It's been complicated at times and they do change frequently, but it's good. We always are on top of this. So just to explain the Department of State as an example, this is the unit that the students would come in contact with after they apply for the visa outside the US. And then the Department of Homeland Security takes care of everything within the United States. And when students get off the plane, they cross through the land border, they meet with the CBP, which is the Customs and Border Protection officers. And then ICE would be the legal enforcement through the arm of DHS. So there's a lot of different components there. And CVIS is actually housed under ICE. And then the USCIS, or United States Citizen Immigration Services, is a benefit granting unit that provides the services for the non-immigrants in the US. So, and more locally, we have the Social Security Administration, which we've worked very closely with in the past couple of years when students apply for the SSN, once they have the job offer and they're working on campus. And we've partnered pretty well with them, especially this year. It's been a challenge, as we know. Okay, so once the students arrive to the US and they're getting settled, we have our International Student Orientation, known as ISO, and it's a comprehensive week-long event that's mandatory for all new international students at the beginning of each semester. So it includes legal sessions from the ISSS team, as well as information from our campus partners, and of course, an opportunity for students to socialize. The last couple of years, it's been virtual, and it's been virtual since 2020, fall 2020, but we've managed to still cover a lot of important content and make it through asynchronous modules for students so that they can access that on their own time, which is really important. And we also have had an amazing team of orientation leaders that meet with the students synchronously and also took part in some of the social events that we've had. And by and large, we've had a lot of good feedback from the virtual ISO, and we're really proud of its success. We always appreciate your help and your support to encourage our international students to attend the orientation sessions, because as we know, it makes a huge difference between students' adjustment process. So I will now let Stephanie talk a little bit about some challenges that a handful of our students have faced soon after their arrival to the US.
Scams and fraud. Unfortunately, newly arrived international students are often targeted in fraudulent schemes. There are many scammers who prey upon international students posing as government officials or interested employers, and they have sophisticated methods of calling international students and masking their phone number with caller ID that looks like a legitimate office, such as ICE, FBI, or the IRS. These scammers take advantage of unsuspecting international students by demanding money, frequently in the form of gift cards. And they tell the students that failure to comply will result in deportation or other negative consequences. We do our best to warn students about such fraudulent schemes through our email notices during International Student Orientation, and the ISSS website also contains information about scams and fraud. If you ever hear of any students who have been victims of a scam, please feel free to direct them to our office, and we will advise them about their next steps for reporting the incident, as well as remind them about how to protect themselves against such schemes. Maintaining legal status. While students are here on a student visa, their main objective is to study and pursue their degree. Here is some guidance in terms of maintaining legal status. The student must check in upon arrival to the US by completing the check-in form on the Our Global portal. They must be pursuing a full course of study. Their passport must be valid. They must maintain and update their address, email, and phone number through their my.rutgers portal. As mentioned before, the DS 2019 and I-20 cannot expire while they are still enrolled in their academic programs, and any changes in terms of degree level or program of study must be updated in the government database. They must have health insurance coverage at all times. they should also obtain travel signatures before any international travel. Maintaining their legal status is the student's responsibility.
What is a full course of study that I referred to in the previous slide? A full course of study means 12 credits for undergrads, 9 credits for graduate students. F1 students are only allowed to enroll in one online course, 3 credits per semester, towards their full-time enrollment requirement. The current guidance from ICE due to COVID provides exceptions to the rules for online courses. And that guidance is set to expire at the end of spring 2022, as far as we know. If it is their last semester and only one course is required, that course must be in person. And J1 students are permitted to take online courses if they have fulfilled their 9 or 12 credit in-person requirement. And hybrid classes are acceptable. Students should also be making normal progress towards their degree. There are very specific exceptions to the full course of study. If a student meets one of these exceptions, they can apply for a reduced course load. They must submit a request on the R Global portal for review. Before our office receives the request for the student, the request must be reviewed and approved by either an academic dean, graduate program director, or registrar for RBHS. And a few of these possible reduced credit reasons are on this slide: illness or medical condition, improper course level placement, final semester before graduating, various Rutgers institutional policies, initial difficulty with English language, initial difficulty with reading requirements, and unfamiliarity with American teaching methods and the ones with asterisks are limited to the first academic year in the US only. Okay, a student's record must be updated if there are any changes from the current information listed. For instance, a student changes degree levels or needs an extension of their I-20. Some of these forms will need academic approval. The forms listed on the slide that are bolded are a few of them. This also this allows our office to obtain accurate information directly from the school about specific application the student is submitting to our office.
Okay, so we are looking at a screen right now, or the slide right now, showing the Rutgers Global portal. So this is what the student sees, and when they log in to the Rutgers Global portal, this is the opportunity for them to see all of the different e-forms that they can access, and that they would then be able to make this request through our office. And we did send out a video. I don't know if anyone was able to watch the video from the email that kind of goes through, and it's on our website. If not, I can send it to everyone, but I think you should have gotten it, I think, in a couple different ways. So this video goes through like a step-by-step process on how things work through our system known as the portal, and how it communicates with Synapsys through the e-forms. And we will also have a separate breakout room later to discuss any questions you might have about this. But this is important. This is what the student sees in Synapsys. So they're going to log on and they're going to see that information. They use their net ID, and they're able to then make all these requests. Now, this is they can access this through our website. We also tell them, in the workshops that we'll talk about, and through Canvas, we direct them to this. This is their main portal. So we just want to give you an idea of what they see and what they're able to then access to provide all the services, all their needs, the e-forms, then to us. Now, for you all as administrators, you then have a key role in terms of possibly getting their approvals of some of these e-forms. So some of the e-forms we need your second approval for, and some of them do not. So if we go to the next slide, we can see that this is what you would then get. So if a student then requests, as an example, a CPT. So this is someone that wants to work off campus as a curricular practical training opportunity. So they would make a request, the student would go in, make the request, and then you would then have to verify some information for us so that we can then review that and then approve that on the entire application. So you would get an email that actually asks you to then log on, and you would then get that information. You would have that hopefully information prepared, and then submit that information through the portal. What's important to note here is that, like, there are some, as I said, e-forms that you may not need the approvals for. So like a travel signature, we won't need the second approval for, but things like changing a degree level or academic approvals, we do need your input for that. Now, typically the academic official is either the dean or the graduate program director. And then that email is sent with a password link, and then asking them to sign on. Sometimes we have to remind people where the email gets missed, which is fine. So we then send reminders. And when you get that reminder, we then, you want to use that latest email for that latest link, because that latest email, the most recent email that was sent, as a reminder, that link is active. So you then use that link to log on. And we can probably go to the next slide just to see a little more detail. So as you can see, you're going to then submit this information, and then we would review it. So it doesn't actually get, it's important for the student to also know. So I've gotten some emails that the student says, oh, when is my academic training form going to be submitted? But then I look and I see that it's still pending, say with the second approver, which is fine. So, but it doesn't actually get submitted to our office completely until all these parts are done. So sometimes this does take some time, and the reminders get sent out, which is okay. We also want to make sure that you all are aware that typically the academic official is, like I said, the dean or the graduate program director, but we do have times where that needs to change, and you can certainly let us know if that needs to be adjusted. We've had people go on leave, we've had people maybe leave the university, so things can get adjusted. We've had people just having a busy time in their unit, and then they want to reroute some of these forms to a different person, and that's okay. So we can definitely help you with that and work with you to make that update for that change. And then those e-forms would then be emailed, and the student actually puts in the email as well. So if it's the wrong person, if it's a incorrect, for example, GPD, then we want to get that corrected, or we can reroute it and make sure the right person gets the right form. So definitely let us know if there's any questions there in terms of who's reviewing the forms and how we get those approvals in session. So, okay. I think we are ready for a break, short break.
The good news is we're actually running ahead of schedule. It could be that we talked very quickly, but we actually have a lot of time left in the morning that we didn't anticipate having this much time. And so right now would actually be a great time for anyone who has specific questions about anything that we covered or that we maybe breezed through and you want us to go back to the slide and talk about a little bit more. Or any specific questions that you may have, this is a great time to open the floor to that. I will say that in the chat, somebody did reach out to me directly, and they asked if we could talk a little bit about maybe learning differences, psychological issues, or other academic or cognitive issues that sometimes present themselves after students arrive. So that's a really good question. And so I think Chris and Stephanie and I can talk a little bit about that. I will say, when students apply, they apply on, an application, we don't always see, and yes, we are going to provide the PowerPoint, Kirsten, definitely after the presentation, we will send everyone a PowerPoint of the slides. So you can refer back to them and grab links and things like that. But yeah, what I was saying was, when students apply, we see, their transcripts, their test scores, and, English proficiency test scores, things like that. That's what admissions gets. But then the whole package of the student, it presents itself when the students get here, and especially when they go through cultural adjustment, they're in a new country, maybe they're in a new program level. Obviously, they're a new program level than they were before. And, Rutgers is a big place. And so There's a lot that students can experience. And sure enough, that might come in the way of academic performance. Maybe their academic performance suffers, or maybe their personal well-being seems to not thrive as much as we would hope it would. So definitely our advisors note that when they come, and they might join, a remote QQA, quick question advising, or they might set an appointment to talk to an advisor. And if we detect that there's something that needs to be addressed, below the surface, that's more than just an immigration issue, then absolutely we will talk to the student about different resources on campus that are available to them. CAPS is an obvious resource, but there's also, different units within the university that help with academic support. Or we might encourage the student to talk to their GPD about, additional support that may be available in their office. And, you as our campus partners, you might also see that before we see it. And so if you're meeting with a student, or you see that their, grades aren't doing so well, or you're worried that they are, not logging in as much as they used to, or participating or submitting their coursework as much as they used to, then, you can feel free to reach out to us also and say that you're concerned about a student, and we can reach out to them also, because it may be a cultural, issue as far as adjustment. It may be something more than that. And we definitely want to address these issues before they become larger problems. So does anyone else have anything they want to add to that or ask about in relation to that?
So I think that how do I put this? I'm thinking of a specific student who provided us with some really interesting challenges about what was appropriate academically, what was appropriate sort of personally, and trying to get those messages across that they were, maybe this leads into even things like plagiarism and what is okay plagiaristically in other countries versus here, and also personal behavior and academic behaviors. We had a student wandering into other classrooms because they were interested in seeing what they were talking about in that class, and they were interested in introducing themselves to people. We're like, hey, you can't do that, you can't do that. So I'm just wondering if there is any sort of a more of a cultural personal orientation where we talk about these are the academic and personal expectations that take place at a U.S. institution.
Sure. No, Matt, those are great questions, and that's a great example that you shared. Unusual as it may seem, and it's a great example of how, is it a personality quirk, or is it a cultural difference? So they're having a hard time, adjusting
Exactly.
with behaviors like that. So I will say, we kind of harp a lot on the regulatory aspect of what we do with advising. And so, we have all this regulatory advising, staying legal status, yada, yada, yada. But also when students come, they also have these different orientation modules through Canvas that they, go through on their own. They have to, show that they've passed these modules. And, they do have, I think the modules do cover things like plagiarism, academic expectations. And so, we would hope that the information is there, how much the students digest and understand on their own. That's a little bit, remains to be seen. I guess it depends on each student. But definitely we do put the information out there as far as, what plagiarism looks like in the United States, and what the university policy is in relation to plagiarism and that sort of thing. When we have the in-person orientations, obviously it's easier to go through all this in person and kind of get that interaction where we can clarify things. But a lot of times, again, we don't know it's a problem until it comes to light, either from the student or from the academic, partner, in which case we're happy to try to address it with the student. Another thing that helps too is our orientation leaders. And so we have orientation leaders that we work with as part of our International Student Orientation Program. This year, we had like 17 or something like that, 17 or 18, maybe more than that. But these are our international student leaders. Most of them are international students. Some domestic students, but they really work with our undergraduate and graduate students as they come in. And they also really help drive the point home about expectations being in the US, what it's like with cultural adjustment. And so, just like if you have kids, they might not listen to their parents, they might listen to their peers a little bit more. It's a great way that we find the students can learn by having these, peer mentors with the orientation advisors who, meet with them at the beginning of the term when they arrive, but then also have opportunities to connect with them throughout the year, maybe to go over things, just like what you're talking about.
If I could just add a couple more points. So I think that particularly with COVID, I mean, students had challenges obviously before just in general, but now I think with COVID, it's even more it's even more visible. I think, you know, we've had students who started their program from overseas and then came here, and you know, there's a whole set of different expectations in that sense too, and they struggled maybe in their first year virtually. You know, we had students that were still enrolled at Rutgers, wanted to be a part of the community, and were, you know, up at all hours in their home country trying to study. So it's, I think that although it's simple, I think that a lot of a major skill that I try to advocate for, and I know that it's hard to do, but just general empathy, you know, not knowing, having that empathy for students, and not always, I think, assuming it's maybe cultural, or assuming it's, you know, they don't care. For example, they could, you don't know where they're coming from exactly, and they're coming from many different diverse backgrounds, diverse situations. Some of them are really good at just kind of falling into line and really knowing exactly the cultural norms, while others, you know, have definitely a much more difficult time. And I think that we've seen so many students, you know, Matt, to your point earlier about finances and financial struggles. I mean, we've had students that are fully supported, but then, you know, there's a change, or with the pandemic, that their research just, you know, was completely slowed down. And we have students that are not supported at all, or had support from coming from home, and now everything has changed for them. So that all these issues bring up so many more issues, and are kind of amplified when they're here and not surrounded by family, and you know, struggling with so many different things and different challenges. So I think that just being, obviously we're all here to help our students, but knowing that, not assuming, and just trying to apply that empathy where we can really go a long way. I know personally, I worked with the student who was, the department was kind of at their end with their, you know, they had really done all they could, but somehow I was able to bring, you know, meet with her, and it was able to, we were kind of able to break open to a new opportunity, and then she's now on a better path, which is great. So you don't know, sometimes it's working that with that one student, as Maya said, with a volunteer, getting a peer involved, and it can make a big difference, you know. So, but it's hard for them, it's hard for us. It's been a challenging couple of years for sure.
I think with any of our work that any of us do with students, you know, whether they're international or domestic, it's just trying to really meet students, you know, where they are. And right now, it's varied. You know, we have a lot of students who are here on campus, and we have students who are elsewhere in the US, and we have students who are still in their home countries, but they're enrolled at Rutgers completely online. So we'll talk actually at the very beginning of the second half of the workshop today. We'll go over a little bit about, you know, current updates for the COVID situation, where students are, and what that means legally for their status and things like that. But so we'll talk more about those specific things in a little while at the second part. But my point is, you know, I think as you know, student support professionals, I think all of us know that we just have to meet the students, you know, where they are. And if that means that they're comfortable in a Zoom call with their camera off, and that's how they want to communicate with us, then let's meet them there. You know, if they say, I really want to see somebody in person, I need an appointment in person, let's have that in-person appointment. You know, right now our office is doing hybrid advising, where we have remote quick question advising, we have remote appointments, and we also have in-person appointments by appointment. And so I think just a big part of, you know, student retention is trying to see, you know, what support is needed, and not just the quick questions, but are there underlying factors? Is there more support the student needs? How to refer them out in a way that has a little more heart than just saying, okay, go to One Stop, you know, but what's going on and how can we support them? Because, you know, in the time when international student enrollment has taken a hit, you know, over the last year and a half with COVID, with travel restrictions and everything else, international enrollment across the US has really, you know, been affected by it. It's more important than ever to retain the students that we have, make them have a great experience, provide them with a great experience, so that they don't just say, well, forget it. I'm not going to do it anymore. I'm going to go home. Or if I am home already, I'm just going to stop, school and or take a leave of absence and never come back. And a lot of it too helps with our future enrollment because, we have students who say, my cousin came here, a few years ago. My cousin's in this program. My classmate was in this program. My older brother or sister was in this program. And so, Rutgers is a big name and people recognize it, has a lot of recognition overseas. And so for students to say that they had a great Rutgers experience and then that word, gets out, it really does contribute to future enrollment. And so, and that's again where we all come together because the more that we can collectively support students and understand the different roles that we all play, then that helps them all have a better experience across the board. What other questions does anyone have about anything that we went over this morning? Because I know we breezed through things pretty quickly. So it can either be, we have the time right now because our second half was going to start at 10:30, is still going to start at 10:30. We're going to break around, 10:15, 10:20. But we have time right now. So if people have either a specific case question, this is a great time. Feel free to ask it. Or if you want some clarification about anything we went over, then this is a good time to do that as well.
Maya, I might just add something if I could. So just Matt, to talk about one of your questions earlier about the funding part, I should probably mention with F1 students, so like you had said, they only show funding for 1 year. That's the requirement. For J1 students, they actually have to show funding technically for the entire program. So that is a big difference between the two. And oftentimes they are supported by, say, their government or, from Fulbright or IIE, and that's not so much of an issue, but there are times where then they move from IIE or their own sponsorship or government sponsorship to Rutgers sponsorship, and then Rutgers has, or maybe they're supported by an assistantship, and the assistantship, as we all know, gets renewed on a yearly basis. But we do look to make sure that they have the expectation of their financial support for their maybe graduation. So that is something where I've worked closely with some of the departments where we have students that are looking to extend. And that is a question that happens on Synopsys with one of the e-forms for an extension. It'll ask you, do you expect to fund the student barring any unforeseen circumstances? And that's when an approver, a dean or graduate program director would select yes. And that's basically what we want to see. If they select no, if it's an F1 student or, even a J1 student, if they select no, then they're going to have to show additional funding possibly.
I can talk a little bit about the F1 students and their funding if you'd like. I do issue the I-20s, the initial I-20s for RBHS. And when the students submit their I-20 application to me, they submit funding for 1 year. They should be able to provide either to us or to the consulate that they're able to fund their entire length of their program so that they know that they're coming here and they'll be able to fund for the entire program so that they don't come for the first year and then run out of funds, right? But for the initial I-20, we really only need to see 1 year of funding. I don't ask for more. Sometimes they send salary letters and they do send funds show that they have way more than what they need for the first year. But for the I-20 purpose, I only add the amount that's for the first year. So I don't ask for extra funds. And if it's a graduate student who's funded from the school, I don't ask for personal funds. So if it's an F1 student who has a graduate fellowship from School of Graduate Studies, RBHS, they send me their acceptance letter that shows how much they have, how much their stipend is, and it goes on their I-20. I don't ask for additional funds for a graduate student who is sponsored by the school. I hope that helps.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
We have international students in our graduate program who are TAs during the school year, and then 2 months in the summer, we give them student employment. we had a situation where one of these students was going to get an internship outside of Rutgers, and it would have given her more than 20 hours a week work. So I just wanted to verify that 20 hours a week is a limit, even in the summer.
So just to clarify, you're talking about, and I'm sorry, I was trying to identify by looking at the pictures who was speaking. Who was?
Linda Everett.
Linda, okay, sorry, I couldn't tell who was highlighted, whose window was focused. So you're asking about doing more than 20 hours, do you say on campus or off campus in the summer?
In addition to the on-campus work, they're doing 20 hours on campus. Can they also do an internship that would add to that 20 hours if they are
Yes.
offered an internship? They can?
That's a good
Okay.
question. In the summertime.
In the summertime.
Yeah, in the summertime, because they can, 20 hours, it's a tricky question. I get where you're going with this, and we'll talk more about employment in the second part, but we can definitely go into this a little bit right now. So international students are limited to 20 hours of on-campus employment when school's in session, but they can do more than 20 hours when school's not in session. So say during the winter recess or during the summer, not enrolled in classes, they can do more than 20 hours of employment. But if it is off campus and they're being authorized for CPT, that's curricular practical training, we have to authorize them for either part-time or full-time. So they can do part-time, which is up to 20 hours again during the semester, or more than 20 hours when they are on a reduced course load, or or between terms, like in the summer, they could do a full-time CPT. If they have an on-campus job and they want to do full-time CPT in the summer, there's really nothing in the regulations that say that they can't do, full-time CPT plus an on-campus job in the summertime. Although what I would say is if we're advising those students directly, we would talk to them too and ask, like, are you enrolled in some sort of coursework in the summer? Because with CPT, regardless of when they do it, fall, spring, summer, when they're in CPT, they do have to get some sort of credit for that course. So if there's a student, for example, who's enrolled in 6 credits in the summer, and they're doing a full-time work for 40 hours, and they're doing an on-campus job, we might talk to the student and say, look, there's nothing in the regulations that specifically prohibits this, but you may want to be careful because you're here to be a student. Your purpose on your F1 or J1 visa is to be a student. Want to make sure that it's not perceived that all you're doing is working and you're not spending enough time, on your studies. And you do need to spend time on your studies, because sometimes students do say, oh, I want to work this on-campus job 20 hours and I want to maximize my off-campus employment. That combination is one of those gray areas that, schools can interpret differently and apply our own policies as far as how we advise students. But first and foremost, their status and purpose as a student comes first. They're not here to maximize on work opportunities and make money. They're here to focus on their studies. So any combination of work that can make it look like the student isn't focusing enough on studies, as advisors, we do want to warn students about that a little bit.
Okay, thank
That
you.
helps.
Yeah, that does help. Thanks.
You're welcome. I wanted to mention something too. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Question
I'm
first?
sorry, I didn't want to cut you off.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Maya, Carissa, and Stephanie for the great presentation. I learned a lot. I have a quick question on one of the slides. I think Carissa or Maya, you presented on international statistics.
I can go back to that.
Thank you.
Sure. Here we go.
Yeah, so in this slide, what we see here is like fall 2021 international students numbers, which is for OPT and AT students 1,065. So do we have a breakdown for OPT, and I believe AT is academic training for J1 status. Do we have a breakdown for this by any chance?
I don't have that readily available right now. If that's something you'd want us to look into, I could go back to Trevor, who's our data analytics guru, and he could look into that. But I will say that academic training is utilized a lot less than OPT, only because, and Chris can talk about this more.
Yeah, I would say unofficially, we probably had like 10 max academic training,
Right.
maybe 15. I would say it's very, very, very small. The majority of that number for sure is F1 students and on OPT. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds great. So 80, I would assume it's probably 65 student and 1,000 are OPT. Like very less in number.
I mean, I would say even less. I mean, I probably
Okay.
like 15 or something max.
Sure.
I mean,
Okay.
really small numbers, probably.
And does this OPT students also have like post-completion OPT, or only those students who are like pre-completion OPT who are currently studying at Rutgers? Do we know that?
I would say there's a very small number. These are probably all post-completion OPT numbers.
Yeah,
Okay.
pre-completion is pretty rare.
Yeah, we
I have, like,
rarely get
two.
pre-completion application. Yeah, like 2.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
You're
It's very
welcome.
helpful. Thanks, Maya.
Sure. And I do see that there is a question someone has. You're welcome to ask questions now, or you can ask them later if you want. It's up to you. We have time that we thought we'd use the time right now to answer questions. Is this, who's this? Is
Hello,
that Evan.
can you hear me?
Hi. Yes.
Yes, hi, thank you. And I'm a master student taking online this semester. I got a question for Stephanie. Hi, Stephanie. Yes, in your introduction, you said that the hybrid F1 status policy will expire. So when will this policy expire for sure?
Not hybrid. So I think we have heard that the current COVID guidance may expire at the end of spring. I don't think we have an official announcement about that, right? But that's what we've heard. So the COVID guidance may, for using like all online classes, continuing students are able to enroll in more online classes than they would normally be allowed to. And that is probably going to expire at the end of spring.
Okay, so that's as a master student, that's the 22 spring is still the hybrid semester, yes?
Spring 2022, we are still using the COVID guidance that was sent in March 2020.
Okay, thank you. So as your concern, when will the policy of the 2024 policy will come next year?
Yeah, I can't answer that. I don't know.
Okay, maybe it's a little bit tricky. Since that
Yeah.
you know that I'm a master student taking online classes this semester, I need to take plans for the next year.
Yeah, I would, what I have been advising students is if there are in-person courses, then you should be enrolled in, if you're a master student, at least 2 in-person classes, and 1 online if they're available, just to kind of get back into the routine of the regular normal F1 regulations.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Okay, thank you. Especially that I read mails a lot to the ISSS, and you just you just explained a lot to me. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Well, that was the
Okay.
bonus because we didn't expect to have students here today since the workshop is really intended for administrators and for our campus partners, but I hope that Evan at least got his questions answered.
Okay,
So
hello guys. I'm Evan. I'm taking online classes in China, and even now I cannot come to Rutgers, and I feel support. I feel, how to say, I got strength from the ISS because you guys explain a lot to help us. And I do feel that you help us a lot because you know that there are policies, academics, and there are a lot of issues that it is confuse us. But with your support, that a lot of issues just got issues on mic just got solved. Thank you.
well, Evan, thank you for the compliment, and I'm glad that you feel supported even while you're in China and remote. I'm really glad that you feel supported and that you feel strength from our office. So thank you for that endorsement. And I
Yeah.
will say, Evan, I'll address this to Evan and any other students who might have joined us today. We're happy to have had you with us this morning so you could learn from this, but I will say the second part of the workshop is really going to be more of, examining cases with our campus partners. And so I'd ask that if there are any other international students who are in the workshop right now, You do not need to join the second half because it's really more directed toward administrators. And so if you have specific questions or concerns that any students wanted to address with us, then please feel free to utilize our advising services or reach out to us through email and we can get back to you. But I'm glad that you were able to join us for the portion that you did this morning. So any other questions that we have from our audience here, or anything else that you'd like us to go over in a little more depth?
Maya, I just wanted to mention something to Brianna's point. I know that we don't, as you said, we don't advise on undocumented students, but we could refer them to this, to student service, legal services, right? And then they might be able to help out. Is that correct, would you say?
About for Brianna's question about undocumented students?
Right.
Well, yes, there is an office. I'm trying to remember. I don't have the link right in front of me right now because I'm screen sharing, but we do have, there is an office that specifically works with undocumented students, and it's a centralized office. I know the name is Jason Rodriguez. He's located, I think, on the Newark campus, but
Right.
he oversees undocumented student support across the university. And so we don't get too many questions, Brianna, to your question about helping undocumented students. We don't get too many inquiries from undocumented students. Oftentimes it might be from an administrator who asks us how we can support them or how to direct undocumented students. And so we do, have that office that we can direct them to. Sometimes too, we get questions from students who are in different visa statuses. I do want to mention that while we've talked about F1 and J1, for those of you who may not be as familiar with visa statuses, there's like one for every letter of the alphabet, pretty much, like A through Z of different statuses. There's B1, B2, P1, O, F, J, like there's so many different types. But our office, the way that we are, certified in SEVIS to host students at Rutgers, we can only advise on F1 and J1 issues. So every now and then we'll have a student come to us or a campus partner direct a student who's on a completely different status, like there might be an L2 or, it's a different status that we don't advise that much. And so we can direct we can answer the student's question to the best of our ability, but ultimately we really are experts only on F1 and J1 regulations specifically. So we will advise that student, to the best that we can and what we know about those visa types, but it's pretty limited. And so we'll direct them usually to their immigration attorney if they have immigration, like regulatory questions related to any status outside of F1 or J1. So that's just a little FYI. Okay, you're welcome, Brianna. Okay, other questions about anything that you'd like to know a little more about? And if not, we can actually start our break a little bit early so people can walk away from the computers or respond to an email or two before we come back at 10:30. Great, thank you. And Mohini just put a note in the chat also. The Dean of Students Office does provide support for undocumented students, and they are soon going to have an assistant dean for undocumented students. So that's really good to know as well. Okay. All right, so just to give you a little teaser for when you come back at 10:30, I hope that you'll come and join us back at 10:30 when we return from our break. So we'll have a little break right now for about 15 minutes. When we come back, we're going to go over some overall updates from our office, regulatory and otherwise, pertaining to international students. We're going to bring all of our staff from our ISSS advising team. So they'll be coming here. So people who you've maybe met over email, you actually be able to see their faces, hopefully, and hear their voices. And they will introduce themselves. And then we're going to have some great breakout rooms where we'll talk about specific case studies, what to do when you see this come across your office. And we can hear from you about what your approaches might be. We'll come back together and discuss some best practices that we've all seen. And then we'll have more breakout rooms for more in-depth questions, because as Stephanie will also talk about employment a little bit in the second half, that usually raises lots of questions. So we'll have plenty of time to go over all that. But for now, I'm going to put up our break slide going forward here. So everyone can now enjoy a break, and we will come back at 10:30. Thanks for being here this morning, everybody.
See you soon.
welcome back. Those of you who registered only for the second half, I'm not sure how many joined us today, only for the second half and not the first half, but welcome. We're glad all of you joined us today. So as I mentioned earlier, for the second part of the workshop today, we are going to go over the topic of employment for international students, both during and after their academic programs. We're going to talk a little bit about students' options after graduation. Also, our team of international student advisors will join us for breakout rooms, and we're going to have a lot of small group discussions about case studies, as well as an opportunity to discuss topics that we covered today already and ask any remaining questions that you might have that came up throughout the morning. So to get us started, I'm going to take a few minutes to go over the current immigration landscape as it pertains to international students. If you have questions while I go through this particular part, because it's a little bit dense, feel free to put it into the chat and I'll be sure to address it. So first of all, based on the guidance from the government and the university's decision last year to offer most classes online, new students who intended to pursue a 100% online course of study have been advised not to come to the US. These students had the option to begin their programs from home, and the start dates on their immigration documents were deferred to the semester in which they plan to arrive for in-person classes. So in other words, students who were starting a program brand new for the first time, you need to have some sort of in-person requirement to come to campus. For students who have been unable to enter the US up to this point, we've been working with academic units who have been great in making accommodations for online coursework, so students could start and continue their programs online and remotely. God bless you, Kirsten. It's okay.
I was just wondering if my mic was still on. I apologize, but
It's
thank you.
okay.
Bless you.
No problem. It's okay. Similarly, for graduate students who wanted to enter the US, but who maybe have a course schedule that is 100% online, we've also been working with other academic departments who have been very helpful in establishing some sort of in-person component for those students to their programs so that they could enter the US with an in-person academic requirement. Otherwise, for students who started their programs abroad and who now want to come to campus for the spring semester, our partners in the admissions offices have been very closely involved with issuing updated I-20 documents and updated DS 2019 documents for the students so that they're able to apply for a visa and attempt entry to the US with an updated document. Continuing students were not subject to the online study restriction, and they could re-enter as long as they had a valid visa. So we have a lot of students who, for example, are outside the US, have been outside the US for the past several semesters, but if they were in active status and enrolled prior to COVID and they're still active, have been active the whole time, they can just re-enter as long as they have a current I-20 and a valid visa. So speaking about new I-20s, the government has recently made a great announcement and policy development that it has made permanent its policy of allowing designated school officials, or DSOs, that's all of us in our office, to digitally sign I-20s. So this is great news. That was a temporary accommodation that was put in place during COVID. And they had said it was temporary, it wasn't going to last forever. And now we've learned it will last forever. It is permanent, and it's great because this increases efficiency from the administrative standpoint, but also saves students a lot of money, because otherwise students had to pay a lot of times to have hard copies of their I-20 or DS 2019 mailed to them through courier service. And so we have a whole system for students to do this, but it gets to be burdensome for students having to pay that. And so now being able to issue their documents electronically has been a great development for the government. So we're happy about that. So let's talk about visa issuance a little bit. Visa issuance, as Carissa mentioned earlier, falls under the purview of the Department of State. So we issue the I-20s and DS 2019s along with admissions, but then for students to get the visa, they have to go through the Department of State using their I-20 or DS 2019. So due to COVID, visa services were suspended worldwide until just a few months ago. They've resumed for the most part in many locations, but still in certain parts of the world, visa application options are still limited, and some of our students are still unable to get visas. On the flip side, though, also there are some consular and embassy offices that are able to waive the in-person visa requirement. So depending on where the student is, they may be able to renew a visa by not having to set foot in an embassy or consulate. And so we ask the students to consult with their local embassy or consular office to see if that option is there for them. But that is another good development as well. So speaking about travel too, throughout the pandemic, there have been several travel restrictions that students have had to consider and that we've had to keep students posted about. So as you can imagine, coming into the US, as we all know, and traveling, through into other countries has been quite complicated during the pandemic. But very recently, just this week, a new presidential proclamation was put into place and has taken effect, which removed the geographic restrictions for international travel into the US. And instead of geographic restrictions, there are now COVID vaccination requirements in place as of November 8th. So just as of 2 days ago, the restrictions that students previously had, not just students, but any international traveler had, was based solely on geography. Now it's more COVID vaccine based and in line with CDC requirements. So that's a very recent development. So considering all of these conditions, we still have many first year or new international students who enrolled in fall 2021 or who plan to enroll in spring 2022 from outside the US. If a student does have an in-person requirement, in person as part of their program, and it could be one course or more courses in person, it could be an assistantship or a fellowship appointment, lab work, or even research that requires their presence, the student can try to get their visa and travel to the US. So we support students who have the visa appointments in any way we can. And while we provide them with tips about what to do with their visa appointment, and we have a letter that they can even download to help support them during their appointment, ultimately the decision of whether or not they get the visa, that decision rests with the consular or embassy officer. So with all these various requirements from the government, it's significant to know that the university is not required to police which students can or cannot enter the US. A lot of times the campus partners, ask about whether or not we're the ones who decide whether they can or cannot come. We give them the tools that they need to go to the visa appointment, and then they get the visa stamp, and then Customs and Border Protection decides on whether they get admitted or not. So it's lots of different steps. If the student is able to get a visa appointment overseas, then the student should still consult with their academic official about registering for a class for an in-person component if it's at all possible. So as I mentioned earlier, there are support letters that our office has been providing that may help at the visa appointment. And we do advise students on a case-by-case basis when it comes to their decision about whether or not to come to the US at this time, what sort of documentation they need at their appointments. So it's a very complicated time, both for students and for the faculty and staff that are working with them in deciding whether or not they're going to come. And so during this time, we always take the approach to advise students according to what is in the student's best interest. So for example, one of the main reasons that we discourage students from attempting to enter the US in the last academic year was because the campus operations were not at full capacity to support them. So we weren't trying to encourage them to get that in-person class, in that person course requirement and come when they're really, the full campus was not up to full capacity to serve them. But as the situation with COVID has evolved and things change, we're continuing to adjust our message accordingly. So remember too that you can always refer to our alerts page, which I think someone will pop into the chat, and as well as our page that we have our email copies of our email notices that we send to students, so that you can always know what is being communicated to students, especially in regard to current government guidance and travel during times of COVID. So if you have any questions about anything I went over in this slide, please feel free to pop it in the chat and I can address that. But otherwise, I'm going to hand it over to Stephanie now, who's going to talk a bit about employment.
Thank you, Maya. To the next slide. As you can see from the slide, when it comes to international students, we think of employment as any service or activity normally performed in exchange for some type of compensation. Common examples of off-campus employment include internships or co-ops. We often get questions about whether volunteer work or conference reimbursements count as off-campus employment. Sometimes there are gray areas in the topic of employment. So when in doubt, feel free to ask an advisor at the ISSS or direct the student to our office and we'll advise them accordingly. Today we're going to go over just some very basics about off-campus employment, as this subject is broad enough to necessitate a full workshop that students are required to attend. Again, if you have additional questions, there will be space to ask them in the breakout sessions. Basically though, off-campus employment must be 20 hours or less per week or part-time when students are enrolled full-time in the fall or spring semesters. So can international students work? The answer is yes. Although there are specific regulations about employment and there are also special considerations in the time of COVID. First, let's go over the types of employment that are open to international students. International students in either F1 or J1 status are eligible for on-campus employment, as well as off-campus employment. However, there are certain requirements and procedures. First, students in F1 or J1 may engage in on-campus employment for up to 20 hours per week during the semester and for more than 20 hours a week during official school breaks such as winter breaks, spring break, or during the summer. F1 students are authorized to work on campus until they complete their programs. J1 students must go through additional authorization from their sponsor, and their on-campus work authorization ends when they complete their degree requirements or after 12 months, whichever comes first. In the current climate, it's worth mentioning that students who are outside the country do not have active CBIS records cannot be paid for on-campus work at Rutgers. There is no formal guidance on other forms of funding or employment for continuing students while they are overseas. There may be international tax and labor laws as well as US labor implications to these decisions. If students have questions about on-campus employment while in F1 and J1 status from outside the US, they are advised to discuss their specific case with their employing unit and ISSS. For off-campus employment, F1 students who wish to work off-campus are required to request authorization for practical training. Practical training is employment authorization that allows students to work off-campus for the purpose of gaining experience or additional knowledge in their field of study. Curricular practical training, or CPT, can be granted as long as the employment opportunity is an integral part of the student's curriculum. CPT is authorized from our office, so there's no application fee or application to USCIS, and we can generally review and approve CPT requests within a few business days. On the other hand, optional practical training, or OPT, requires students to file an application with the United States Citizen and Immigration Services, or USCIS. OPT is a benefit to F1 students. It's available to all F1 students, and with any type of OPT, the work must be directly related to their field of study and appropriate for their level of education. The application fee for OPT is currently $410, and students can apply for either pre-completion, post-completion, or STEM OPT extension. STEM OPT you'd have to have post-completion first, and then if you're a STEM degree major, you can apply for the 24-month STEM extension. While international students are enrolled in their program, they may apply for pre-completion OPT, although CPT is generally preferable since it's quicker for a student to apply within our office than for pre-completion OPT with USCIS. And as we spoke earlier, we rarely get pre-completion applications from students. After international students complete their academic program, they may work off campus for up to 12 months through post-completion OPT. If a student is a STEM eligible program, then they apply for an additional 24 months of employment authorization through the STEM OPT extension, and there's specific requirements in order to apply for STEM. Under the current guidance from the government, students may continue to engage in authorized CPT and OPT while overseas. However, if applying for OPT or STEM OPT, current regulations require the student be inside the US at the time of filing their application. So they cannot apply for OPT, optional practical training, from abroad. We have several online workshops available to students. Students can take these workshops on their own time and they're required to apply for OPT. So if the student is applying for optional practical training, they must take the post-completion OPT workshop in order to apply. There are quizzes for the students to complete in each workshop to test their knowledge of what they have learned. And some of these workshops include on-campus employment, off-campus employment, post-completion OPT, and academic training. I'll hand it over quickly to Carissa to address the J1 academic training portion of this slide.
Can I ask a quick question first?
Sure.
Sure.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to know what is really the difference between pre-completion OPT and just CPT?
Pre-completion OPT, every international student is allowed to apply for 12 months of optional practical training. Pre-completion OPT would be applying to United States Citizen and Immigration Services before they complete their degree requirements for pre-completion OPT. Anytime a student applies for pre-completion OPT before their program ends, it deducts the time from the post-completion that they're able to apply for. So say they want 6 months of part-time pre-completion, that deducts 3 months from the 12 months that they're eligible for. So if they do take 6 months part-time pre-completion, they are only eligible for an additional 9 months of the post-completion when they're done. There's no employment requirement for post-completion OPT or pre-completion OPT, but for curricular practical training, it's an integral part of their degree. It has to be a requirement of their degree. They're going to be enrolled in a course that allows them to participate in curricular practical training. There has to be a job offer letter before we authorize the CPT, and they must be enrolled in a course that requires the curricular practical training.
Thank you.
Did I get it all? I think. Okay. Okay, Carissa.
Okay, so just to talk a little bit about academic training. Academic training is, again, for J1 students, and it's for off-campus employment. So it's similar to OPT in the sense that it's in their field of study. It's a purpose to get their experience and gain knowledge in their area, but it's different in other ways. So our office is actually authorized. We would then authorize the academic training for that specific job for this J1, for a J1 student with specific start and end dates. And it can be during their program or afterwards. So again, we have a smaller number of students on J1 visa, but it is important to note that there are different timelines, particularly because we issue their authorization. It's internal within our office, and it's actually free. So that's a big difference. But we do look at their information, and it's we approve it within our office, which usually takes 5 to 7 business days. So we do this just to give a glimpse of what we would need. We would need information about the employer. Many students do sometimes work on campus for academic training if they're done with their program and they've graduated, but this is evaluated internally within our office. And unlike OPT, they actually have to have the job offer before they graduate. So that's a big difference as well. So there's lots of intricacies with academic training, and the regulations are a bit vague, but it's always best to reach out to myself or one of our other advisors. Jen Ling also helps out with J1 students a lot. And feel free to ask us any questions if there's any challenges with academic training in particular. And this is all to say that employment is a little complicated, but we wanted to give you a quick snapshot on what you can learn from and what they're authorized to do. And for any specific questions, we can talk and of course discuss more in the breakouts. So back to Stephanie about onboarding.
Thank you. You can see a general overview of the onboarding process and what documents you will need to collect from the student to enter them into the HCM or payroll system. I know there are some departments or units with where a specific staff person only handles student onboarding while another staff member helps onboarding faculty scholars. Although this progression looks very easy, we know that there could be various issues with the student's information not going through E-Verify. of one of the other systems. Also, there may be a situation where you will need to reach out to your HR contact for more information and guidance if you have questions about how to onboard either an F1 or J1 student, or even another visa status like J2, etc. You can go to the next slide. Finally, our students have worked hard and they're ready to graduate and they're ready for their next step. In general, students have several options after graduation and they are listed here. Despite what you may have heard in the media or from students, international students are still eligible to apply for OPT, known as optional practical training, and academic training. They can also transfer to another program, a different program, or even change their program or degree level at Rutgers. So when I say transfer to a different program, transfer to another school at a different program in another school, or change their degree program or degree level at Rutgers. They may also have plans to change their current immigration status to a different visa category, or they decide to return home and or depart the United States. Finally, please note that the grace periods for F and J are different and students should be aware of this. F1 students have a 60-day grace period versus J1 students have a 30-day grace period. Okay, I will hand it back over to Carissa to introduce our breakout rooms.
Okay, so it's time to break out into some groups and discuss some real life scenario, not real life, but roughly altered realistic scenarios, I should say. And but before we do, we should probably do some quick introductions because I see we have more of our staff members here. And we have joining us our ISAs and possibly some front office staff and support. So Maya, what do you think? We go around the room quick or?
Sure. I guess we can have our international student advisors talk and introduce themselves, and maybe they can kind of popcorn it to each other until we've gone through all the ISAs in the room and all of our staff. So I'm gonna start with Steph because Steph shows up first in my window. Steph Acuna.
I think it's because my video is on. So my name is Steph Acuna. I'm an ISA at Rutgers. I used to work in admissions, and I know a few of the names that I'm seeing on the side over there. I primarily work with undergrad students, particularly from SAS, but I also have a handful of grad programs. And I'm excited to be here and to talk to you in the breakout room. And I'm going to pass it on to Megan.
Yes, hi everyone. I'm Megan Cody. I'm one of the international student advisors. I primarily work with graduate programs, specifically computer science, some engineering, social work, Mason Gross graduate programs, and the PharmD program. So nice to meet you all. And I'll pass it to Jinling.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Jinling, one of the senior international student advisor. I advise both F1 and J1 students, and mainly with graduate students in particularly more of the professional schools, including GSAP, Sky, Blaustein, and then also other graduate programs as well. So I look forward to talking to you in the breakout rooms. I'm going to popcorn it to Lamar.
Hello, my name is Lamar. I'm a little different than an advisor. I'm the international student coordinator here. And a lot of what I do is very similar to a support role. I also am a student and have been a student. So I also support a lot of our students with QQA advising, but a lot of really practical Rutgers, navigating Rutgers things. So if you have any questions, I'm here for that theme. And I'll pass it to Jacqueline.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jacqueline. I'm the advisor for mostly, I advise like SAS juniors and seniors, and the grad schools for food science on most of the language schools, GSE also. Anyone else?
I think we haven't heard yet from Lee Allen.
Oh, okay. I'm gonna pass to Lee Allen.
I think she was just admitted to so she probably didn't hear that.
Okay, maybe we can go to Trevor first and then go back to Lee Allen.
Sure, sounds good. Hi everyone, Trevor Cook, Associate Director for Administration and Compliance. I work more on just our day-to-day administration in partnership with Maya, especially on a lot of our technology and data side of our administration. And Lee Ellen, you're up next.
Hi, good morning. My name is Lee Ellen Johnson. I am an international student advisor. My primary areas of advising are graduate students, specifically in the fields of statistics, FRMS, data science, engineering, ECE and ISE, human resource management, biochemistry, biology and microbiology, industrial relations. And I'm sure there's a few others that I'm forgetting, but that's the gist of what I do. Thank you.
We also have Susan and then Mohini, and I think that takes care of our staff that's with us today.
So I guess I'll go. I'm Susan Maldonado. I'm the CVIS Compliance Coordinator. I work with mostly data closely with Trevor and the databases that the students are in our database, the CVIS database, and the institutional database, or also known as SRDB. And I guess Mohini's next.
Thanks, Susan. And hi, everyone. I'm Mohini Mukherjee, Director of International Student Services at Rutgers Global. And I just want to say thank you all for joining today. Many of you I know who join this workshop almost every semester, sometimes come back as a refresher. We really appreciate, and some who are new, but we're just so grateful and we appreciate your partnership in supporting international students on campus. So thank you again, and it's good to see everyone. Maya, back to you.
Thank you. So we appreciate everyone joining us today from our staff also. And now we're going to hop into the breakout rooms. And so I'm going to open up 8 breakout rooms. Everybody will be automatically and randomly assigned. And then I'm going to move our advisors around to make sure that we have at least one advisor in each breakout room. So we'll take about 20-25 minutes to go over some case studies. Every breakout room has the same set of case studies. So in case you're wondering if you're missing anything from being in one room or another, they're all the same case studies being given in every room. And then we'll come back after about 20-25 minutes to share some best practices before the next set of breakout rooms. And so I will stay in the main room if anyone has any questions. And here we go. Well, welcome back. It looks like we've got everybody back from the breakout rooms. So I hope that everyone found those useful. And I want to give Carissa an opportunity to debrief a little bit about the breakout rooms and talk about any specific questions people may want to share or best practices that came up during the breakout room.
Sure, just I need 1 minute.
That's fine. That's
My
fine.
computer is freaking out a little bit because I was sharing my screen and we ran out of time. So sorry for my group. But we can talk it. If there's any residual questions, we can also talk about it or reach out to anyone. So, okay. I am ready. Okay, so in terms of best practices, we just wanted to give a quick summary on some tips and some changes that we've made over the years. So, and over the past couple months. So we've had, of course, to adjust some things. We've adjusted some of our workspace to obviously accommodate COVID-related needs. But we've also had an opportunity to think about whether our offices should be a little more accessible to students based on their ability and their needs. So for example, sorry, someone needs to mute. Can everyone hear me? Okay. So based on their needs, like having a location to meet with students on the ground floor is also key. We've added some closed captioning to some of our workshops, and this was in response to a student that was hearing impaired, but also, you know, it helps all of our students with any extra support they need for comprehension and language needs. So keeping some of these things in mind has really been helpful to us to help better serve our students. And as we know, communication can be hard in a normal environment, and on a virtual environment, it's even more challenging. So of course, recognizing, as I mentioned earlier in the first session of our workshop, recognizing our students, that empathy goes a very long way, and recognizing that our students are coming from very diverse backgrounds, and that does help them a lot. And confirming your intended message by either email or phone. Some students are better understand things by phone versus email can be a challenge. So using a variety of language sometimes to confirm what you mean and better relay your message is also helpful, and changing the media up, sometimes phone with cameras on, reading lips, all those things can really be helpful. And not to forget that Rutgers lives in its own world of language and acronyms, which we did, during the case studies, we had different acronyms, and realizing like, we want to make sure that we're being cognizant of that and making sure that not everyone will understand what those different acronyms mean. And our office has a whole slew of them as well. So keeping all those good things in mind. But I want to hear from all of you if you have any other thoughts for best practices or tips. Anyone want to share something? I know Matt might have had something he wanted to share. I don't know if he's joined us.
I'm always
Okay.
talking and asking questions. I'm happy to, but if somebody else wants to go first, that would be fine, because I'm always asking questions at times.
I'll just say that I do find it very impactful for especially students. You have to realize for many of these students, English is not their first language, and it's so easy to forget that. You're not dumbing down language, right? You're just making it easier to understand sometimes if you just use different words. I know it sounds very simple, but it can be very impactful to just switch out the vocab sometimes. And like Carissa is saying, just reword it a few times. And if they still don't understand, give that offer to get on a phone call. Sometimes things are easier to say in real time versus in writing. But I know for a lot of my students, for those that I think are not understanding what I'm trying to say, I will have the call or the Zoom call with them so I can relay things in real time. And then I'll follow up with my email to put bullet points and say, as confirmed to what we talked about today, here's the link to this. And so they have it as a reference as well, in case they maybe didn't absorb everything spoken or when they were listening, they can read it. So that way they can reference what you were talking about. So just kind of affirming what Carissa is saying here, it can be very, very helpful to do that. And I'm sure we all do that already, but just the reminder of having that mindset when we talk to our international students that sometimes they just need a little extra communication done with them.
Thank you, Steph. Anyone else have any recommendations of best practices before we hop into the next set of breakout rooms?
So I will say a couple of things. I think the challenges that we run into, and I'm speaking for myself, but I don't think I'm alone here, is that, when your office starts talking about things like federal regulations and students not being allowed back in the country, and the level of seriousness of the issues that these students run into with anything from their visa renewal to whether or not CPT is eligible or OPT is eligible, or when do they need it and what are we signing off on? Even just approving that stuff can feel a little daunting. I think that what we've done at the GSE, one of our challenges at the GSE, we're a small school. We don't have a lot of international students. We don't have regular practice at this. So we do rely on your office, and we do ask a lot of questions and try to make sure that we're clear on what the student is doing very, very carefully before we make any decisions. I think as far as best practices, one of the things that Steph said in our actually the case studies made me feel like, well, we're doing this all wrong, because we just say contact the office. Your office. I heard this in another meeting this week when I was talking to another department. There's the big thing at Rutgers right now is these new one-stop. There's a one-stop for students, and there's a one-stop for faculty and staff. But your office is kind of a first stop. It's not necessarily a one-stop, because we still have to do the advising and get them through their programs and get them to be successful, but it has to be a first stop. So the students, that's why I was asking questions about what do you do in orientation? How do we address these things up front? Because I want to better understand what these students should already have been preloaded with by the time they're working with us. So I think some of the best practices, for example, I would recommend this for any department. We set up a group of professional development series where we've asked a lot of departments to come and speak to our advising staff. We've talked to Maya, we've talked to veterans, we've talked to the registrar and the one-stop shop and had them come and speak to us. And they're all willing to do that. Office of Disabilities and Student Services. And that staying connected, I think, is really important because, as you said, I believe it was Carissa, Rutgers already has way too many acronyms. And your office has them, and we have them, and we assume a lot of things about our students. So I think the staying connected part, I had asked if we could be on that Canvas site. Can we as staff be having access to what the international students are being put into on Canvas so that we can see what that looks like and be able to walk students through it? But I think overall, the other side of that best practices, and I'd be interested in how other students feel, is that there are a lot of ways that international students, on top of they just want to be students. They want to be immersed in it. They want to be part of what's happening in our school and what's happening in New Jersey, and they want to learn more about what happens in this culture and what happens with their student experience. So as you pointed out, in some ways, there's a lot more things that are different for these students, but in other ways, there's a lot of similarities, and they want to feel like they're connected and part of the group, and not well, I'm outside here. I'm from somewhere else, so I'm outside here. So it's a challenging way to work with students to make them feel connected and also let them see that there are a lot of support areas. There are a lot of ways to get support from other locations, but that our office needs to be really savvy about what we need to tell those students. And those case studies were challenging because I read the best answers and I thought, how the hell am I going to remember all that? So it's good to stay connected.
Matt, I love so many of your points. I think that was perfect, really. But I really liked what you said about the case studies definitely were challenging, but we wanted to hit you at a couple different angles in terms of how we were to talk about it as well. So I think that was hopefully that it was a good challenge for you. But I think exactly what you said, just remembering that they're also students, and even like what you all do existing already with your own orientations, just getting them involved with other students too makes them feel welcome and connected. So I think all very good points. So thank you so much. Okay, do we have any others before we break out again?
I think given the time, now it's after 11:30, we should probably just hop right into the breakout room. So if people want to specifically address in one of the breakout room topics, because these new breakout rooms are going to be specifically by topic, then they have an opportunity to do so. I'm going to go to that slide so you can see what we're going to be talking about in these breakout rooms with the specific advisors. But I will say too, if anyone does not have any more questions and they're on overload right now and they've gotten about everything they can take, feel free to exit. We take no offense to it, because at the end of these second set of breakout rooms, we're just going to rejoin just for a quick wrap up, but you're not going to be missing any great content or anything at the end of the session. So with that, and like I said, we'll provide a PDF of the slides afterwards, and upon someone's recommendation, I think we can provide a PDF of the case studies as well. Again, there's no test on the case studies. We just thought it was a good exercise in thinking through some issues that you might come across. And so I hope you found them all useful. All right, so with that said, I'm going to create, let me get back into mine. There it is. I'm going to open up 8 breakout rooms, and I will hang out in the main room. So if anyone has anything they want to talk to me about specifically, please feel free. Oops, hold on a second. I don't want to randomly assign people. I want you all to be able to pick where you want to go. Hopefully there's some good conversations going on. Okay. Looks like everyone is now back from breaking out for the second time. So welcome back, everyone. I hope that you found at least the second set of breakout rooms helpful in a different way, maybe talking about your own case studies and your own questions that you had that you wanted to talk with an advisor about. And thank you all who've stayed with us through the entire morning. We know it was a very long morning with a lot of dense information. So I hope that you have found it helpful. We did go over a lot of information today, and I hope that you have an improved understanding of our international student and their experiences and their unique needs, considerations, and a little bit about compliance responsibilities. Not that you're responsible for keeping compliant, but just being aware of compliance issues and when it's appropriate to direct students to our office for more information. As we've discussed today, we all play a role in supporting our students during their time at Rutgers. And today has been really a great opportunity to connect with you all and to learn more about each other's roles in the international student experience. So thank you again for joining us and for your help in supporting our students. So just to close today, here's a slide with our contact information. We encourage you to reach out to us anytime you have any questions or concerns about working with international students. The contact information for Rutgers Global as an entire unit is here in this slide, but we'll pop into the chat some additional contact details for our main office at 180 College Ave, as well as the RBHS office in Newark. So in the meantime, thank you all for joining. We thank you also for taking time to complete the evaluation. We will send out an evaluation later today, and I'll also send out later on a PDF of the slides and of the case studies. So thank you again. We appreciate your help in supporting international students. And I hope you can all get outside and enjoy some fresh air before you go back to your virtual office or your on-campus office.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you again for your participation, especially in the breakout rooms. We really appreciate your feedback on that.
Awesome.
Thank
See you
you.
soon.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.